Look at the events you've written down. Is it real to you that the conclusion you reached, I'll never get what I want, is a valid interpretation of those events? Can you agree that virtually any child at that age and in those situations would have reached a similar conclusion? Now we're going to play the possibilities game. Well, imagine that 4 friends of yours are visiting you and looking at a videotape of the events you just wrote down. Your interpretation of those events when you were a child was, I'll never get what I want. That is one valid interpretation of Mom and Dad's behavior. That interpretation wasn't wrong, but there are other reasonable interpretations of the same childhood events that you just didn't think of as a child. So let's ask each of your friends for another alternative interpretation. Can you see that one friend might well say, you might not have gotten what you wanted when getting it depended on others giving it to you. When you no longer have to rely on others, you might be able to get anything you want. Couldn't the events of your childhood be explained by this interpretation? Here's what your second friend says. You didn't get what you wanted as a child. That doesn't mean you'll never get what you want. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation that I'll never get what I want? Here's a third possible interpretation of your childhood events that one of your friends suggests. Maybe you didn't get some things you wanted, but you also probably did get some things you wanted. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation that I'll never get what I want? Here's another interpretation from your fourth friend. Of course you weren't able to get what you wanted as a child. You couldn't earn any money on your own. When you have skills and earn your own money, you'll be able to get a lot of things you want. Couldn't any one of these interpretations explain your childhood interactions with your parents just as well as your interpretation, I'll never get what I want? Of course they can. So is it real to you that a belief you've lived with almost your entire life, something you thought was a fact, is not a fact, isn't the truth at all? It's only a truth? Merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of earlier events? Right? Please continue to interact totally with this program in order for it to work, and that includes answering my questions out loud, even if your answer is only yes or no. So let me repeat this question. Do you get that I'll never get what I want is not a fact? It's not the truth, but just a truth. Merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of earlier events? I'll bet you do now. With a little help from me and your friends, you can see that not getting what you wanted as a child and your parents' comments about not giving you things could have at least 4 different reasonable interpretations or meanings. Do you remember what you wrote down a few minutes ago as the source of your belief, I'll never get what I want? Look at the text box below on your screen. Right now, imagine seeing what you saw then and hearing what you heard then. Now take a few minutes and really imagine the events of your childhood that led you to forming the belief, I'll never get what I want. Didn't it seem when you were a child as if you could actually see, I'll never get what I want in those early events with your parents? It did, didn't it? You may have the sense that you didn't see the belief, you felt it. Once you formed the belief, I'll never get what I want, you probably did feel it. Now, I'll get back to the feeling in a minute, but what I'd like you to focus on now is not the feeling, but on my question. When you didn't get what you wanted as a child, didn't it seem as if you saw, I'll never get what I want? As if you could point to it? As if you could have said to me, Morty, can't you see I'll never get what I want? I didn't hear you. Did you say yes? Now that you think you saw I'll never get what I want as a child, I'd like you to look again. Did you really see I'll never get what I want? If you did, what does I'll never get what I want look like? Could you really point to it? Does I'll never get what I want have a color, a shape, a location? Is it real to you now that you saw events, but never really did see, I'll never get what I want? If anything you can really see can be described, and if you can't describe what I'll never get what I want looks like, is it clear now that you never really saw it? And since you never really saw I'll never get what I want, what did you actually see? Is it clear now all you really saw was not getting what you wanted in that family as a child when you had no ability to get what you wanted on your own? In other words, all you really saw was a series of events. You see, what happened was that you looked at a series of events that can be interpreted in many different ways. You gave the events one meaning, which was, I'll never get what I want. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw yourself not getting something you wanted, it was as if you could see that meaning in your failure to get what you wanted. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events. You gave the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you created one. Is it real now that the events had no meaning until you gave one to them? Here's another way to understand that events have no inherent meaning. When I say that, I'm saying you don't know anything for sure about what you'll have in the future as a result of these childhood experiences. What do I know for sure about what you will get in your future from knowing what you got or didn't get when you were a child? Is it clear that I wouldn't know anything? And if I don't know anything, you don't either. All you know for sure is what actually happened. You didn't get what you wanted a lot of the time. And finally, if you never saw I'll never get what I want out there in the world, where has it been all these years? Did I hear you say that I'll never get what I want has only existed in your mind? That you never did see it out there in the world? That's right. If the belief is more real to you as a feeling than as a concept, here's another way to look at it. Didn't it seem as if your parents' behavior and comments when you were a child made you feel I'll never get what I want? It did, didn't it? But you just agreed that the events have no meaning. Is it possible for events that have no meaning to make you feel I'll never get what I want, or anything else for that matter? Of course not. So if frequently not getting what you wanted as a child couldn't have made you feel I'll never get what I want, what did make you feel that? By now I think you know the answer to that question. Please answer out loud. That's right. You felt that only because that's the meaning you had already given to frequently not getting what you wanted. Let me help you make this real. Imagine that I had been there when you were a little child, and it helped you realize there were alternative interpretations. And after that conversation you concluded, not getting what I want from my parents as a child has nothing to do with whether or not I'll get what I want when I grow up. So here's what I'd like you to do now. Take a moment and really imagine being a child and wanting something badly, and mom and dad tell you you can't have it. As you imagine the events, apply this different interpretation to their behavior. Notice how it feels to be a child who's thinking, not getting what I want from my parents as a child has nothing to do with whether or not I'll get what I want when I grow up. You can use the pause button below to pause the video while you make these childhood scenarios more real for yourself. When you're done imagining, press the play button. As you imagine this scene, does it still feel like your parents' words and actions are making you feel, I'll never get what I want? Probably not. And if you didn't feel I'll never get what I want then, would you feel it now? Again, the answer is no. So mom and dad's comments never caused you to feel I'll never get what I want. That feeling came from your interpretation of their behavior. And since your feelings were not caused by events in reality, they were only the result of a meaning you made up to explain the events, is it real that the feelings you had when you didn't get what you wanted as a child from your parents didn't tell you anything at all about what you'll be able to get when you grow up? They didn't, did they? Okay, now take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and then say out loud, I'll never get what I want. Is it the truth? Does it still feel like the truth? Your answer is very important here. Take another deep breath and say, I'll never get what I want out loud. I'll bet it feels very different when you say these words now than when you said them at the beginning of this exercise. Do these words feel true even a little bit? Unless the belief is 100% gone and the words don't feel true at all, you probably still have the belief. Remember, holding a belief is like being pregnant. You either is or you ain't. There's no sort of. If the belief is still there, it probably still seems like you saw it. Once it no longer seems as if you saw I'll never get what I want in those early events, the belief will be gone. So please click the repeat button to repeat that step of the process. If the belief is gone, please click continue.